If you haven't already realized it, let me remind you that all worldviews try to give answers to the same exact questions. Some answer them explicitly, while others quietly assume the answers. In this video, I'm going to ask one simple question, and then follow it wherever it leads us. In the last video, we asked whether morality itself is real, and not whether we feel moral. It's not a question whether morality is socially useful, it's whether good and evil are objectively real. In other words, I asked whether they exist independent of opinion, preference, or power. And in so doing, we discovered something important. If moral judgments are real, they cannot be reduced to chemistry, instinct, or social conditioning alone. Having come to this realization, we now face the next unavoidable question, which is, what are we then? And more precisely, if morality is real, then what must be true about us? Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Braden, and this is video 5 in a video series I'm doing for 2026, which I've titled Faith, Reason, and the Search for Truth. If this is your first time watching one of my videos from my channel or from this series of videos I'm doing for 2026, I'd encourage you to go and watch the first 4 videos in this series as soon as you can. They're not very long. I suggest that you do that because it will get you caught up on our discussion so you can understand more clearly where I've been going with this series of videos and how they relate to the book I wrote recently, which I titled An Atheist Delusion, which was written from a Latter-day Saints perspective on atheist Richard Dawkins' anti-theist, anti-Christ book, The God Delusion. Be sure to do that after you finish this video first. I'm purposely creating each video to build on the previous video, and I'm doing so by addressing those questions that challenge the ideology of materialism, and then answering those questions that matter most. Of course, each video can be standalone videos, but the experience with each one, as I said, will be better understood if you watch them consecutively. And if you like what you see and hear, I invite you to click on the like and subscription buttons, as well as click on the notification bell, so that you can receive notification when the next video in the series goes live. I so appreciate it. Anyway, let's go ahead now and continue with video 5's review of What Are We Then? Which is an important question that springs forth from the question, if morality is real, what must be true about us? Ask yourself, what assumptions do you think most strongly shape how people view God, suffering, and morality, often without realizing it? Are we more than biological machines having wet brains? In other words, are we accountable for our actions, or are we just unintended, unguided, and undirected robots that have accidentally been programmed as robot-like machines? Robots, as you know, don't believe. They don't have consciences, morals, or free will of their own. And if this is true, then it begs the question, are meaning, purpose, and human consciousness themselves fully explained by matter alone? Or do they simply point beyond it? Another deeper question we need to ask ourselves is consciousness merely neural noise, or is it something deeper? If good and evil are not real, then what ultimately are we? And again, if good and evil truly do exist, then what does that say about human identity? What kind of beings are we really? Can meaning, purpose, and consciousness exist in a purely material universe, or are they evidence that we are more than just matter alone? In other words, are meaning and purpose just illusions, or are we more than just chemistry? Can matter alone explain the phenomenon called consciousness? Because if we are just biology, then why do choices even matter? These are fundamental realities or features of reality. Meaning, purpose, and consciousness function as real aspects of the world, not inventions we arbitrarily make up out of nothing. They are discovered, not manufactured. Much like mathematical truths or moral truths have been discovered. You don't create them by believing in them. You recognize them. In that sense, they are closer to truth, law, and order than to opinions. That said, let's go ahead now and take these on one at a time. In his book, The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins regularly speaks of harm, injustice, cruelty, and evil, especially when criticizing religion. Those words matter. For example, in his anti-theist, anti-Christ book, The God Delusion, you'll find 3 such statements, which he, having an atheist worldview, uses to affirm that there's evil and wrongdoing. which supports my proposition that such views affirm there is in fact moral reality. The first one is, and I quote, "Religion is capable of driving people to such dangerous folly that one feels justified in labeling it a mental illness." The second one is, quote, "How is it that otherwise good people do evil things? Religion is one answer," end quote. And the third one is, and again, I'm still quoting from his book, God Delusion, "There are all sorts of things that people will do in the name of religion that they would not do otherwise," end of quotes. Why is it that atheists can use words that imply morality and yet feel they can say with impunity that it doesn't exist? In response to Richard's statements here, I say, because outrage is not the same as preference, and if morality is merely chemical firings shaped by survival pressures, then moral anger has no more authority than a sneeze. You can feel it, but you can't claim it to be true. And yet when Dawkins condemns injustice, especially as it is perpetrated by religion and its adherents, he is not saying, "I dislike this." He is saying, "This should not be." And that word "should" is doing enormous philosophical work here. Don't you agree? The bottom line is that moral outrage reveals more than chemistry. It presupposes moral reality. In other words, you cannot meaningfully protest injustice if injustice isn't real, right? If human beings are nothing more than matter in motion, then all thoughts are unintended chemical reactions, and beliefs are evolutionary strategies, and moral judgments are just survival tools. But there's a problem if all of this is true. And that problem is, if your outrage is produced by blind, unintended chemistry alone, then it doesn't carry any authority beyond its cause. And the fruit from such a reality is simply undirected and unintended chaos. I submit that materialism can describe how a feeling happens, but it cannot explain why it should be trusted. Please keep in mind that this is not an attack. It's an implication. I am simply asking the obvious next question, which is, what must be true if materialism is true? In regards to this question, I'm simply going to let truth do its work. I submit to you that truth is inherently powerful and self-evident, and so it will reveal itself eventually as we go down this path. Truth needs no protection or promotion to survive. In fact, St. Augustine is quoted as saying, "The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose, and it will defend itself." Another respected philosopher, Austin Farrar, is quoted as having said the following, "Though argument does not create conviction, lack of it destroys belief. What seems to be proved may not be embraced, but what no one shows the ability to defend is quickly abandoned." Rational argument does not create belief, but it maintains a climate in which belief may flourish. End of quote. And this is exactly the path I'm taking here. And so I ask you, what must be true if this worldview of materialism is true? Before you answer that, let us first follow its propositional path to its obvious conclusion. Neuroscience can correlate brain states without thoughts, but correlation is not explanation. A brain scan can show where love occurs, but not what love is. It can track neurons, but not meaning. It can map impulses, but not truth. And so the hard problem of consciousness remains, which is, why is there an inner world at all? Why especially is there meaning, in other words? As I said, materialism can explain mechanisms, but it cannot explain meaning itself. When I say meaning, I am not talking about emotion alone. Meaning includes purpose, why something exists, value, why something matters, direction, what ought to be pursued, identity, who we are and not just what we do. Meaning is inherently normative. Normative is that state of mind that establishes, relates to, or derives from standards, norms, or rules, which then dictates how things should be, rather than describes how they actually are. In philosophy and social sciences, meaning distinguishes between what is, the descriptive, and what ought to be guiding behavior, ethics, and judgments. It's called the evaluative. In short, meaning tells us what matters. The bottom line here for me is that matter alone does not generate oughts or ought tos. It is, however, the means of transporting our thoughts to a higher or lower state of mind. A prophet living in ancient America some 1600 years ago, whose name was Moroni, touched on what's at the heart of meaning and purpose when he taught his people the following. It's found in the book of Moroni, in the book of Mormon, Moroni chapter 7, verses 15 through 16. It says, and I quote, "For behold, the Spirit of Christ is given to every man, that he may know good from evil. For behold, the Spirit of Christ," or the light of Christ, "is given to every man, that he or she may know good from evil. Wherefore, I show unto you the way to judge." End of his quote. This spirit of light is a special kind of matter, for as you know, light itself consists of certain particles of matter. I want you to notice what this declaration by the prophet Moroni assumes. Moral knowledge is real. Moral judgment is universal. Moral agency is intentional, for it is no accident or an unintended faculty. It's real. The Lord told the prophet Joseph Smith the following as it relates to man's knowings regarding such things as moral judgment, etc. He then recorded it down in what's known as the Doctrine and Covenants, section 93, verse 29, and I quote, "Man was also in the beginning with God. Intelligence or light of truth was not created or made, neither indeed can be." End of quote. This understanding of what are we then really directly contradicts materialism altogether, as well as the how creedal Christians have come to view God and each of us, his children, over the past 18 or 19 centuries. If intelligence is fundamental and not emergent from an unintended firing off of chemically charged neuron burps in our brain, then consciousness is not an accident of matter. I guess what I'm saying here is that matter serves the mind and not the other way around. President Russell M. Nelson taught this concept before his passing, and I quote, "Our spirit bodies existed before we were born. Our mortal experiences are part of a larger, purposeful journey." That single sentence dismantles materialism's central claim, which is that each of us are temporary, biological events with no prior identity and no purpose to our being here and now, and that there's no continuing life after our death. And so, in the minds of materialists, like world-renowned atheist Richard Dawkins, there is no existence before life or after death. In other words, we're all just a soon-to-be dirt pile whispering through life until we arrive at our destiny, the grave, and fade away into oblivion. Philosopher Thomas Nagel, a fellow atheist of Richard's, admitted, and I quote, "The materialist neo-Darwinian conception of nature is almost certainly false." Man. End of quote. Why? Because consciousness, reason, and value do not fit comfortably inside it. This is not theology, it is intellectual honesty. So, on the other side of this two-sided coin, if morality is real, if meaning is real, and if consciousness is irreducible, then we are not accidents. We are, in fact, as Joseph Smith said we are, moral agents unto ourselves. We are accountable beings. We are conscious selves, and not chemical illusions that will one day fade or melt away like the hoarfrost and ice in the Arabian desert. Period. In the book of Moses, chapter 1, verse 39, we read, "For behold, this is my work and my glory, to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man." That verse does not describe biological survival. It describes purpose and meaning. People often ask themselves, are meaning and purpose an illusion? Or are they a feature of reality? I would ask them, why do humans seek meaning if the universe is indifferent and an illusion? If meaning is invented, why does its absence feel tragic rather than neutral? What destabilizes the claim that meaning is merely projected rather than discovered? I say, if there is no purpose or meaning to this life, then why does life feel like it has meaning and purpose? Why does purpose, calling, and direction feel normative if they're just illusions too? I purposely chose to not go down the path of argument here. I've chosen not to attack anyone's beliefs during this series of discussions. I'm simply asking questions like, what must be true if what our atheist friends say is true? Think about it. When we let the implications of their propositions surface, by asking these kinds of reasonable, thought-provoking, honest questions, something becomes very clear. At least it does in my mind. And that something is that materialism explains parts of us, but not all of us. The next obvious question remains, what are we then really? And once you ask that question of yourself, honestly, the answer will begin to change everything around you and in you. Well, there you go. From video 4, we came away with an unavoidable question. If morality is real, what are we then? And in today's video, by asking more reflective questions, we've seen that moral obligation, conscious awareness, and meaning itself did not sit comfortably inside a purely material universe. They point beyond chemistry alone, even beyond survival itself, and especially beyond accident. In discovering this, it raises the next big question. If we are more than matter, where does meaning itself come from then? In the next video, video 6, we'll take this one step further. We'll ask and answer the question of whether or not meaning, purpose, and human consciousness can truly be explained by matter alone, or whether they point to something deeper still. Anyway, as you wait for video 6 to go live, I invite you to reflect on this question as we move forward. If meaning is not real, then what ultimately are we living for? Okay, until next time, I wish you continued success. Goodbye. God bless.